We're live.
Good morning. Welcome to the Renewable Energy Standard Working Group. We are calling the meeting to order, and our first item on the agenda is the agenda review with our facilitator, Jennifer Kirby.
So let me pull up I'll share my screen with the agenda on it, simplified. Here we go. So you're in meeting discussion points and polling responses from September 20th, 2 weeks ago. They're already summarized in the supporting materials for today's meeting. Got a couple of comments and you've got them. And I just wanted to add that those summaries identify tensions in the current renewable energy standard and related energy policy statutes. And they're probably not comprehensive given the complicated territory that you're covering, but it does give you a place to start the conversation today. And so that's the link. So some of those tensions, you're going to see them pop up here in this agenda as targeted questions to try to figure out where in policy do you want to be paying attention and discussing. So here's a look at the agenda. Welcome and opening comments. It's pretty brief. At 8:40, we'll start an interactive polling and discussion. The poll is a little longer than what you're used to. It's a chance to get some ideas out there so that if conversation lingers in one place or another, at least that there's a greater breadth of ideas that are at least on paper. Well, it's digital, but paper, so to speak. The other difference is that you'll get the results on your screens this time. So once I close the poll, you'll get all the results if you have a screen with you so you can scroll around the morning and have those results available to you. Those of you online, it'll be really easy for you to grab. I'll put the link in the chat. Those of you in the room, you should get it sent to your email, but I can also get you a link. 9:15 break, 9:30, a nice long time for discussion. What is factoring into your thinking about whether to define the renewable energy standard as a clean energy standard or as a renewable energy standard? Another break at 10:45. Brief discussion at 11. That's a chance for you to let me know if there are omissions on that barriers document, and then also reframe some of the items that are there as needed. Public comment is at 11:30 today. If you have comments that you'd like to bring to this meeting and you're a member of the public, please email Saoirse Anderson so you can get into the meeting at that point. And at 11:45, next steps will adjourn by noon. I do anticipate taking notes on screen during portions of this meeting, and if that's the case, an image will show up on the shared screen of the Google Doc that I'm using, but you can also access that. It's in the agenda. Okay, that's it for our logistics. I will pass it now to Senator Bray and Representative Sheldon for announcements, and then we'll start the business of the day.
Right. Well, I don't know that we have too many announcements, but one announcement is the Department of Public Service released their public opinion survey, and that is worth taking a look at. And then the other one I can think of is, you probably all already know this, but in case you don't, the Energy Action Network Annual Progress Report came out last week as well, which always helps to inform this conversation. I recommend looking at that. Those are my announcements. Did you have an announcement?
Those are both my announcements. So, all I'll say is observing once again Washington, D.C. compared to Vermont legislature. Happy to be serving in this assembly, not the
All right.
I don't think you have to be a member of the House to run for that job if either.
Get back over to Jen.
You ready for polling? So I am wondering, those of you online, if all of you sitting, any working member online right now, have you received a chat from me that has a link to the poll? If you haven't, send me a brief response so that I can just locate your name quickly and get you that link. Those of you in the room who are using the colored index card again, you can use your QR code, or you can go to menti.com and put in the numerical code there that's on the card. I will pull up on the shared screen the poll results. They will update in real time. Another thing for you to know is that each person who participates in the poll and each person on the live stream will have access to the results. They're also aggregate, they're also anonymous to some extent, and that they're not linked with identifying information, but Please be aware that those results will be available as soon as I close the poll, which will happen in probably about 10 or 15 minutes. Is there anybody experiencing technical difficulties? Are you able to see the screen? The Renewable Energy Reform Legislative Working Group in meeting poll. Go to the first question then. You may submit up to 3 entries. If that seems too few, then think first. And it's a way to start prioritizing some of the volume. In what ways could the renewable energy standard seek to decrease generation of greenhouse gas emissions? How so? Reference tiers 1, 2, or 3 in your answer as needed. It's relevant to your answer.
Hey, Jennifer, I am not seeing the link yet.
Okay, let me send you one.
Thank you.
Go to material.com. Yeah.
Senator Watson, did you get the link now in your chat?
I did. Thank you very much.
So there will be a lot more words popping up on the screen than you can probably spend time reading right now. It's okay. One of the objectives of this exercise is to at least get some of the ideas out there before conversation picks up.
Is there any way for us to look at that screen?
Yes, there is.
You can join the YouTube.
No, I can't quite hear that.
Delayed, no, it's delayed. I'm gonna try to shut down right now.
But there is. I just need to think about how to get it to you easily. So I'll know that you've done your thinking on this question and are ready to move on to the next when you're looking up. Probably also hear less typing. Take a minute to wrap up that answer. The scroll is really fast. Sorry, I'll scroll manually. So again, you're not going to have time to read all of these right now. That's okay. The full report will come to you as soon as I close the poll. Let's get through a couple more questions first. Preparing now to shift to the next question. Where or how could policy better support a drastic reduction in carbon load? It's okay to note specifics like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, if that's applicable for your answer. And again, you may submit up to 3 entries. I have a link that I can email you. We'll pull that poll back up again in a moment, but just need to pull it down for a bit. So the typing in the room has slowed down. It looks like it might be online too. Preparing to move to the next question. Did your prior answers focus on, and you can check all that apply. This is a quick question. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, other areas of policy? Don't know at this time. Those of you who checked other areas of policy, I'm just wondering what areas you were thinking of.
Well, I did for, there are intersections with transportation and heating policy that
That's,
figure into this.
Net meter.
Net metering, did you say?
More specifically on Lewis's point, clean heat standard.
Are there other areas of policy other than intersections of transportation, heating, net meter? Okay. Let's go to the next question. In what ways could the renewable energy standard bring new renewables into the system? Please differentiate in your answer the scope that you're talking about, whether you're looking large region, northeastern, Vermont, or local. Yes, I got your message and I can share that link with you. So many screens open on my screen. That's making it a little tricky at the moment. Dear, close the tab. Sorry, crew. We'll get you back up there and running in just a minute. So there's some questions popping up in here as well as answers. Question. One of the things I appreciate more and more deeply the longer I work with this group is how everything is connected and all these questions connect to each other. It makes it difficult and, worthy of taking some time with all these questions. You do have a lot of information that's coming online. So let's open up discussion in a moment once we get through these questions. Cool. Take a minute to finish your answer. I am preparing to move on to the next question on the poll. Things seem quiet, so I'm moving to the next question. Did your prior answers focus on please check all that apply? And again, just looking for a quick at a glance, were you looking at the larger system, Vermont system, or the local system? I know you gave several answers, and it's okay to check every box if you were looking at all those scopes. Okay. Thank you. This poll has 3 more questions on it. They shift in theme a little bit to considerations regarding the resilience and reliability of grid infrastructure. So that's where we're headed next. What if updates would help prepare and support Vermont's grid infrastructure to withstand increased environmental stressors and climate change? You may submit up to 3 entries. 10-second count until I close this question, go to the next. Okay, moving to the next question. Here to go. How is the renewable energy standard reinforcing climate adaptation currently? And how is it? Are others still waiting to respond to this question? I'm preparing to move to the next question, next and last. Where or how could policy better support robust adaptation? The answers previous to this one were indicating not necessarily this policy, but how these policies work together. So as worded, this question could, your answers could probably go in a lot of different places. Give a 10-second count until I turn the poll down. Need more time, raise your hand, your virtual hand, or let me know in the room.
Let's have one more second.
Sure. Okay. 3, 2, 1. My guess is that when whichever device you're using to use the poll, that you're probably getting a link to the results. If that's not the case, I will send you a link. I'm gonna go ahead and put it, I can put it in the live stream to everybody to see the results of this one.
Also in the agenda.
And it's also in the agenda, yep. But I'll go ahead and put it in the weight room, I mean, not the weight room, the chat. It probably feels a little bit like a classroom homework exercise to go through and fill all that out, and especially since it's so quiet. The utility of that is that I think maybe as you've noticed, each meeting generates ideas and some summaries, and they don't all have to be in agreement still to be useful and to be referenced, and they're all informing the next discussion point. So in the next several weeks, there will be a lot more information coming to this group that will lend insight on some of these questions, including the factors, the things that are factoring into your thinking from this poll. You do not need to respond to all those items. I have a couple of questions, but you can take this conversation wherever it needs to go. So my questions are really backup in case there's complete crickets. But if there's an observation or something you're wondering, you can go there. I am wondering, for those of you who, yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Can I make a comment?
Yeah.
Just a clarification. It hasn't come up in any of the meetings. I think when I talk about new renewables, I'm talking about anything post 2010, like that was in our bill H320. I mean, if you read the words new renewables on that screen, you might think, oh, it's got to be built in 2024. I think for most of us, who support H320, new renewables is after 2010. So we're not talking about starting everything, in 2025.
Clarification.
At some point, I'd like to talk about why 2010. We can talk about that later. I've never been clear on why.
I'll say it because we want to make sure all the wind resources in Vermont can be counted toward a tier 1. And if we were to get to 100% renewables and they were not counted, we'd have to curtail them, which makes no sense to take a renewable that's efficient offline.
That answer is that the answer you're looking for? Yeah. So there's lots that you could respond to. Some are the ambiguities of these questions and refining some of those definitions and how you use them. If you have questions of each other about other things that you saw, I think that's very key. I am wondering what stands out for you from that exercise, either your own individual working through those questions or what you were noticing pop up in the responses. Or questions that co-chairs you may have.
Okay, I didn't, although I clicked on get an email copy of the results, I didn't see it. What's another way to look at that?
Well, if there's a result that you're looking for or a question, I can pull it up on the screen.
I just mean like the survey in general. I saw a lot of comments going by, so between trying to participate in
Yeah, you couldn't read them.
contributing, I couldn't read them, so I saw a lot of things pass.
I think you have company there.
All right. So I'll use another way of getting, thank you.
I'll email it to you. I have a show of hands type question if need be. Let me go ahead and send this to you, Senator Bray. A show of hands, how many of you, when you read these entries or the responses pop up in this poll, immediately have a sense of wariness, caution, or even aversion to some of the items that you saw? Just a show of hands if that was the case. And virtually, it would either have to be if your camera's on, raise your hand, or raise your virtual hand. I'll repeat the question. How many of you, when you read these entries, immediately had a sense of wariness, caution, or even aversion to some of the items that you saw? The reason I'm asking that question is, like, what's the level of mental activity when you see something pop up there that you might want to speak to?
I will just, so I don't feel like I've been able to digest what we've
Seen it?
So,
You
yeah,
want some time to look at it?
I think so, yeah.
Yes? Okay. Is everyone able to see the results if they want to get great?
Well, would it make sense to take 5 minutes and let us all read through it?
Absolutely, that sounds like a great plan.
Do you know how I make the auto scrolling stop? I don't know if anyone else can do that.
Yep, I can.
I don't know how the group would feel about this, if I might be recognized, but I wonder if we could just even go through them as a group and just read them. Maybe that would be obnoxious to people, but there are a lot of them.
There are a lot of them.
Yeah.
Let's, there's two ways we can go about
Put them
this.
up on the screen if you manage it so we can see.
Yep, I can stop the scrolling so that it stays in one place. I can also get an Excel spreadsheet that would give you some of those items and entries. But let's just, before you step into that exercise, think about how you might use them in this discussion. Because there might be some items there that you actually want to talk about. And you won't be able to flag them all in this conversation here if you still want to talk about the differences between a clean energy standard and a renewable energy standard. So what you might want to do is sit with these results even longer than what you have in this meeting, longer than 5 minutes, and have an exercise where you actually point to some of those questions, the things that come top of mind, the cautions and the promises that pop up along those entries. I don't know how you feel about that kind of homework, but it is an exercise that lends itself to time. How do you want to use this time?
Well, I'm wondering, does it make sense to just like start with question one, everyone read it, and then say, does anyone want to clarify a question or discuss something in there?
You can absolutely do that, and it may bump into your time around clean energy versus renewable energy. Yep. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me pull them up on the screen then. I need to stop the scrolling to, I think it was Christopher's point.
Stopped doing mine
Oh.
miraculously.
Okay, so I will pull up the results here.
Thank you.
And the scroll moves really quickly, so I'll just manually scroll. I suggest that if there are questions on what you see up there, that this might be a good time to ask clarifying questions?
I have a question. I don't know what by protecting existing renewables so they stay online means. What is protecting?
Which column are you looking at?
Two.
That was my comment, so happy to speak to it.
Great.
Great.
We're seeing conflicting policies in the environmental space. I come back to the hydro facilities that are near and dear to my members' hearts. At the same time, we're saying we want more renewables and more zero carbon emission resources. We're seeing ANR when they issue new water quality certifications for the generation, put restrictions on that reduce the output of those facilities. And in some cases are making the economics not viable. So people are starting to talk about taking dams out, for example. So we need, at some point, we need to reconcile, are we going to do what it takes to keep generation online to keep reduce carbon emissions? Or are we going to try to save fish and wildlife by putting restrictions on the generation that the flooding just destroys anyway when it happens?
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Other questions? Clarifications?
I would like an explanation about not allowing Hydro-Quebec RECs resulting in a decrease generation of greenhouse gas emissions.
Where are you?
Third column, mid.
Right here.
How would that result in a decreased generation of greenhouse gas emissions?
So that was my comment. And I want to zoom out from Hydro-Quebec and just talk about like any large existing hydro. And the reason is because that's a system that already exists. And if we're going to decrease the amount of greenhouse gas emissions, then we need to be working towards new renewables, and that's not a new renewable. So and as it is, because those RECs are much cheaper, it allows for an arbitrage to happen regionally. And so by not allowing them, it would actually put more pressure to increase more new renewables, which would actually decrease the greenhouse gas emissions. I hope that's clear enough.
So for me, I have a question. In there somewhere, I had said it would help me to better understand the renewable energy marketplace, to what degree it's in surplus or constrained. So as rent requirements in Vermont come to influence purchasing decisions, and in other states, are we short of supply? And so when rec values, they drive the actual creation of more generation, or are they in surplus and we're just buying recs associated with pre-existing generation, so there's no net impact on the development of renewables in the region? I don't know the answer, but it would seem like in the end, there's a transaction that takes place, and part of the accounting is RECs. And if you had a vast surplus of them, every state could be buying them in and have no impact on developing more renewables. If they were constrained and people were sort of bidding against each other, you could then make a business opportunity for someone to say, oh, I want to be part of that. I'm going to create a new generating station that will be clean, and I'm going to sell my RECs into that marketplace. But I don't know how that market is operating. So it's a little hard for me to know when we talk about this question, how the res influences the real world purchases of utilities.
I think you're getting at a fundamental question we've got to wrestle with as a group, which is once Vermont reaches 100% low carbon, I try to say zero carbon because almost nothing is zero carbon. Once Vermont reaches 100% very low carbon electric portfolio across the entire state, do we still want to be having electric ratepayers in Vermont pay more money to reduce the carbon load produced by people in other states? The electric system serving those in other states. And I think this gets fundamentally to your question about HQ or large hydro RECs, because I think there's a fundamental disagreement among this group about whether it's Vermont's obligation to get our electric portfolio to 100% low carbon, or whether it's our obligation to get ours and all of New England's energy portfolio to a low carbon standard. And those are two, I think, legitimate points of view and legitimate perspectives, but they're fundamentally different in how you approach the REC markets and when it's appropriate for Vermont ratepayers to be paying more or less.
Well, can I ask a quick follow-up, since you're someone who has to go out and purchase power? When you go to the marketplace, are RECs available in abundance, or are they constrained? And so there is some price pressure on RECs depending on, over time, how large the Vermont requirement becomes and how large the requirements of our neighbors become.
It's a complicated answer that Ken is much more knowledgeable about than I am. I'll just say there are other things happening that make it more difficult to say. For instance, people who are not under any obligation to buy Vermont RECs, buying them so that their portfolio is green from a marketing standpoint, not from a regulatory obligation standpoint. So there are things happening that I don't think even the creators of the REC market anticipated. And I'll turn the rest over to Ken if I could, because he is much more knowledgeable.
There are several comments that are queuing up.
Yep.
So we've got Peter,
Sure.
Celia, Chase, and Ken.
I'll wait until
Yeah,
everybody's
okay.
had a turn.
Okay. So, Peter.
Hi, thanks. So just to be clear, Vermont is the only state in ISO New England that allows RECs from old out-of-region hydro to count toward its renewable portfolio standard. So when we talk about who's cleaning up what for whom, we've asked every other New England state to already, they're already doing something we're not doing. And we did that in 2015. I think there was a legitimate reason back then to do it. I think it's time to change to bring us into line with the rest of New England, because at the end of the day, my understanding is that when a Vermont utility does not have to retire a REC from a renewable in state, they're allowed to give it to another state, another utility or corporation or whatever, sell it. We can then backfill it with those HQ RECs, which are not allowed in any other state more cheaply, right? If we were to bring those RECs home, we would then force all those other purchasers to buy renewables from another source. Now, granted, Vermont is a tiny part of ISO New England. I get it. We're not going to move the whole market, but it is contributing to a problem. So I think that is one of the main things we might want to consider trying to address in res reform.
Chase and then Ken.
Thanks. And I'll just apologize to everybody. I've got a cold today, and so I'm not as lucid as usual. So I'll do my best to be succinct and make sense. But please ask any questions if I don't make any sense. I think the way I just heard you phrase it, the choice there, Louis, it's either about helping Vermonters or helping people outside of Vermont. I guess I just want to say that I don't think that is an accurate distinction. I don't think that's really the choice that we are being presented with. And I think that when we frame the topic in that lens, we are unnecessarily creating division. It's a divisive way to talk about this. And the reason that I think that is really twofold. I think the first reason is if you scroll down to the very bottom of the responses to this question, at least on my page, the second to last one, the far left corner, says, quote, since no one is building new nuclear, allowing nuclear does reduce GHGs. I think that this is actually a pretty good example of why the sort of distinction you tried to raise, Louis, isn't really accurate. Since no one is building new nuclear, we aren't in fact reducing any emissions with nuclear. We're maintaining the status quo emission level by maintaining existing nuclear. And that I think is really the key distinction here, just like the key understanding. By keeping existing renewables or nuclear online, we are maintaining the status quo. We're not changing the status quo. We're not reducing emissions. We're just maintaining where we're at. If we were to bring new nuclear online, or if we were to bring additional renewables online that do displace fossil fuels, in that case, we are in fact reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so I think that, just stripping aside the sort of divisiveness and the dualism of putting, pitting Vermonters against New Englanders as if it's some sort of a battle, I really don't think that's what it is. I think that, at the end of the day, this was the second point I was going to make, which I think flows from the first, is it's really just looking at what the portfolio is, looking at what exists in it now, and looking at how we can change the portfolio by adding new things to it that will actually change the greenhouse gas emission calculus. I think at the end of the day, it's really just sort of a practical, common sense thing. And so thanks for bearing with me. I hope that added up.
With respect, Chase, that's not what I said. What I said was, I think we have a question to answer, which is the res about emissions from Vermonters' electric use and other uses, or is it about a broader question? And I think I've said quite carefully that there were legitimate perspectives to both answers to that question. But I do think it's a fundamental question. Is the res about Vermonters' carbon load, or is it about New England's carbon load? And I do think that makes a difference in how we proceed. Thanks.
Ken?
Yeah, I apologize. This may take a couple of minutes. This is what I've done for 30 years. I buy and sell power in the markets, buy and sell RECs in the markets. I've been in this market since it was very first created in New England. And one of the most frustrating things I run into in these conversations is people describing the market who have never actually participated in it and don't understand the impacts of moving things around. So the REC markets could be a week-long college course, Senator. I mean, each state has its own market. Each state picks its own winners and losers for generation they want. People don't like Hydro-Quebec. In some states, it's not allowed. In Connecticut, they loved the biomass for a while. Well, politics changed. Now they don't like biomass, so now biomass is being phased out in Connecticut. We saw Connecticut and Massachusetts 5 years ago. They put trash burning as a renewable for 1 year, and then they took it out. And every time that change happens, the REC prices change, the number of RECs change. In Vermont, for example, one key example for us, last year we had a drought. There were no hydro RECs available. REC prices in New England region for Vermont RECs went above the ACP.
What is the ACP?
The alternative compliance payment, which is something that was put in statute. If a utility doesn't meet its requirements, then you have a financial obligation to pay. That was in the $11 and change range. We were seeing trading of Vermont RECs at $14 or $15 because hydro was not running. And as Louis said, some of the large industrials decided they wanted to get renewable for their marketing. So they were buying available hydro RECs off the market. And they were almost willing to pay anything because they wanted that for marketing. And they were seeing a lot of value there.
I'm sorry, who was buying?
We saw Google, Amazon, Burton at one point was doing it. I mean, all these companies that are trying to come out with their green marketing were buying RECs. And although the Vermont RECs are expensive, if you look at the New England region, Vermont Tier 1 is one of the lowest cost RECs. So that's the first that the industrials buy up before they go on to other things. So we were seeing REC prices last year, $14, $15. While this year, we've been wet. I mean, hydro is just running crazy. So now we're seeing the REC prices, same market, same requirements. Now REC prices are $4 because there's a lot of hydro RECs available and people can use those and swap the things around. I just want to comment on we can bring the recs back to Vermont and put more pressure on. I led the power team at Burlington that first got down to 100% renewable. When we made that choice, we did an analysis of what would it cost Burlington Electric to be 100% renewable and retire exactly what we bought for our contracts. So whatever power we bought through power contracts, just retire the recs and get 100% renewable. Compare that to what if we take advantage of the regional markets and buy and sell recs to be 100% renewable, but in the cheapest cost for the Burlington ratepayers. Now, this was 2012, but the difference at that time was a 25% difference in rates. So the regional market, from an affordability standpoint, the ability to move recs to the people who can use them most valuably to meet their local government policies actually is a benefit to Vermont. It keeps rates low. And I would disagree that allowing us to do those transactions actually somehow is greenwashing or allows people not to have to build things. The policies around New England are diverse enough that, utilities struggle to balance everything they need to do and keep affordable while filling all the little tiny boxes that policymakers try to put in to make everybody happy. In my mind, the best way to do this is to set the broad goals and then let the practitioners figure out how to do it the most cost-effective way. The more we pick and choose winners and losers, the more expensive we make it and the more we slow the progress down. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Ken. So I have two more comments.
Are there people in the queue?
There are other people in the queue, yeah.
I'm going to hold mine.
Do you still want to hold?
I do want to hold out. I'll
So,
wait until everyone's spoken.
Ben and then Christopher.
Thanks. So I want to agree with what Chase put out there. I think, there's some distinction between what Lewis said and the way Chase characterized it, but I think fundamentally there are some boogeymen being propped up here, and no one, at least on this working group, that I am aware of, has suggested that Vermont should be wholly responsible for cleaning up the New England grid. If somebody suggested that, VPIRG would oppose it. What those of us who are really focused on getting new renewables more significantly in the mix of the renewable energy standard are really trying to bring to the table is the idea that if we, as a state, rely primarily or exclusively on existing renewables, a couple of things are true. One, that's not something everyone could do, right? Like if you scale that up to New England, we don't have enough renewables for all of the electricity usage in New England now, let alone the growth that we're expecting to see. And so from VPIRG's perspective, Vermont basically hunkering down and going, we're just going to sort of hold enough renewables that already exist for ourselves that we're going to be clean and everyone else has to build new stuff, is not the right way to go about this. That we should be using existing renewables, keeping them online whenever possible, and also getting new renewables built. And right now we don't think the mix is right. We're talking about 10% new, 65% existing. The other thing is, especially as we look at the growth of the use of electricity, it is absolutely essential that we look at building new renewables, because fundamentally, if we use a megawatt hour more next year than we're using this year and only ever go to existing renewable sources or existing clean sources, we are taking that away from some other use, right? Like that plant is not going to produce more because we bought that rec. It's going to go to us instead of someone else. And so we're not actually reducing greenhouse gases in that scenario. We're just moving around, which spreadsheet gets to take credit for it. And so I'll say, I try to clearly state, at least for VPIRG, and I think, and there are a number of other folks on this working group that also share this perspective.
Ben,
What
can
we're
you hold?
looking for.
Sorry, Ben.
Go ahead.
Just a quick clarification about what you just said.
Yeah, I did not understand what you just said.
Which part?
The last point that you made.
About new load?
Yeah,
Okay, so.
the shifting on the balance sheet, if you could just kind of restate that idea.
Yeah, absolutely. So as electric usage grows over time, and we're talking about over a couple of decades doubling total electric usage. If we have a policy in the state that essentially preferences existing renewables, and so we're sort of gobbling up as much as existing renewable as we need to meet our growing electric usage, those plants, wherever they are already generating electricity by the virtue of their existing, and they're already running, right? And so someone's using them today. And if that someone is, using them to meet current electric usage, and then we are saying, no, in the future, we're going to buy that. And that'll clean up our grid. Like that'll clean up our grid and let us use renewable electricity for that new electric usage. It didn't exist before. Somebody installed a heat pump or bought an EV. Then we're basically taking that electricity that's already generating carbon-free power, low carbon power, and moving it onto our, I use the term spreadsheets, but basically the accounting under our renewable energy standard. So we're moving renewable electricity and RECs around rather than generating new renewable electricity and RECs to meet that growing load, meet that growing electricity usage.
So if you're, Ben, does this come back to sort of this fear or caution that the policy is going to preference existing renewables?
I guess what I would say, and I know I've been talking for a little while, so let me just wrap by saying, I think it's all about the balance. And especially as we're growing electric usage more and more, as we electrify, a balance that's 10/65, 10 new, 65 existing or whatever, that just is fundamentally out of whack with the reality that we are going to need a lot more electricity in the future. And especially for that new usage, we really need to focus on new generation, because if we're not, then fundamentally what we are doing is allowing greenhouse gases to go up. That has to be from new generation, or else we're just moving around renewables and not actually getting in the way of more carbon going to the atmosphere.
I think I understood
The gist of it?
Yeah. I don't know that I agree, but I do think I understand.
Yeah, it's okay not to, yeah, as long as, and thank you. We've got one more, Christopher, and then I don't know how many other comments we're sitting on, but I'm also aware of time. Christopher, go ahead, and then we'll see where we're at.
Yeah, thanks. And to me, I don't know, a few scattered thoughts, but I'm glad that the comment from Senator Watson was about HQ Rex. That's long been a concern for the Sierra Club. And it is important in that we are unique. Vermont is unique, as I understand it, allowing Rex from HQ in the New England market, which is its own factor, but we stand out there. But to me, it's also worth talking about Rex more generally. And I don't pretend to understand all the nuances. I've never been a power purchaser, so I will add those caveats. But I think about it this way: when we reach 100% renewable, and when that, and that's not actually the controversial part of our work here, right? I think everybody is on board with that. I see it as a resident of Burlington. Vermonters more generally will celebrate, hey, our grid is 100% renewable. As long as we maintain Rex, this is a total fiction, and we paper over, and Vermonters would be surprised to hear both the headline that, hey, our grid is 100% renewable, and we're burning fossil fuels to bring electricity into Vermont, because turns out, you may not understand this, but on spreadsheets somewhere, we're buying renewable attributes from somewhere else, and so we just keep the fossil fuels going to supplement our power. That is weird, right? That is strange, and that lacks integrity, and it is very confusing. I grant you, there's a lot to balance in terms of rate pressures, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But fundamentally, if we celebrate, and you were just talking about large, the commenter prior was talking about large corporate entities buying these up so that they could claim green attributes and renewable attributes and produce. This snowboard is produced with 100% renewable energy, while they may well be getting fossil fuel power right to their plant. So this at some point, we've got to end this fiction. And I don't know exactly where and when, and I don't know the phase in, and there's a lot of sensitivity to ratepayers. But very clearly, where we stand alone in New England is an obvious place for us to examine whether or not we're going to be as loose as we have been. But just generally, I think we do ourselves and this debate a great disservice if we don't at least try to acknowledge the shell game that goes on when we allow RECs, and when we allow RECs moving forward as we amplify our the requirements to get more and more renewables, and then continue to allow the shell game to satisfy that.
May I ask Chris a question?
Yeah.
Chris, Lewis Porter here. Do you think we should get rid of the REC system overall then? Because I think that's the logical outcome of viewing it as a shell game and fundamentally dishonest. And I think that's maybe something we should take up. Are you advocating for the elimination of the RECs and the arbitrage purchasing system wholesale?
I think that is a very complicated question, because we're not alone in this. The region is playing this game. I think that, as I understand it, the current res does talk about some phasing out, right? And I think, to me, that makes sense to put us on a trajectory that retires these RECs. And I would need more understanding before I could, but very plainly answer your question, Lewis. But in theory, I do think that it's time. Look, I mean, Vermont getting to 100% renewable without the region doing the same is not really a solution to the global crisis, right? So this is where some of our state dividing lines is not helpful, and it would be tremendous to have a New England strategy that was in concert. But and you would place Vermonters at a significant economic disadvantage if we phased out RECs and nobody else did. I understand all that. That's part of this puzzle for sure. But in theory, when we all aim for 100% renewable, then there should be no, or only in a disaster moment, a fossil fuel production contributing to the grid, right? We should mean it, and it should be dependable. And when I say dependable, 100% renewable should be 100% renewable, not 100%, not 80% renewable and 20% paper fiction. So I suppose I do. I think that has got to be thoughtful and phased, and will probably only work if we have truly a regional approach to get there.
Louis, can I answer your question? Do I have a second?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just jumped the gun here. Our coalition of environmental groups discussed the very question you just asked, Chris. Should we propose something that works within the existing res and rec credit structure, or should we propose something completely different? We had that very, very boisterous discussion, and our coalition of groups came down on, let's work within the existing rec credit market to make the res a more transparent and a system that really works to bring on renewable power. So I think pretty much every environmental group that's around this table believes that you can work within the rec trading market to make the system better and reduce greenhouse gases.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So in response to Senator Watson's question, I said, I would like to better understand that marketplace so that we, if we talk about it as a shell game, obviously no one's interested in deception. We want to have legitimate, genuine progress. And at the same time, I don't personally, and just speaking for myself, having listened to all this, I still feel like I don't understand the marketplace well enough to know whether or not the way we use the res actually drives the purchasing decision of utilities and how it influences them. You know, I go back to the original question, like, is it a market where everything's already sold so that as people go out to buy them, the price goes up? As every state, Vermont and every other state needs more, it's going to drive the marketplace to generate more renewable energy because there's a business opportunity there? Or are we awash in RECs and there'll always be this arbitrage going on? And so we won't make sort of, as a region, real progress. So I wrote down a couple of things. One was that transparency is key. I mean, I still think maybe everyone else in the group has got this all sorted out, but I still feel like I have questions about it. And so it just keeps pushing me to make our system more transparent so we really know the pros and cons of the way we do it now. I can't answer that as completely as I'd like to before we would reform the regs. And some question that came up, you know, this is in response to Ben. He said, everyone has to build new stuff. And the question I have in response to that is the marketplace insufficient to drive that kind of innovation in what's being generated and offered into the marketplace? Can you rely on recs to influence that marketplace? Again, I don't know the answer to it, but not knowing that answer makes me hesitant to say, oh, I know how I'd reform the RES without really understanding the finances and the real world logistics of pushing for one kind of solution over another.
I hesitate to give out statistics without having them in front of me. But I'll say, I think the res is driving that. We've gone from something like 15% of Vermont's carbon load coming from the electric sector to 2%. We have, I think, the third highest solar penetration in the country, despite, you know, having a climate that's not ideal for it in some ways. So I think that the current system is successfully driving towards certain outcomes. The question is, are those the appropriate ones? I mean, that's what we're here for, is those the appropriate ones? But I would say, and I would defer to the people around this table who know a lot more than I do, but I would say that it is a successful system in terms of driving towards outcomes that you set it to achieve. I'd also say that, you know, the REC system is in some ways no different than the power part of what you're purchasing. There's no ID tags on the power that says this comes from a solar plant, this comes from a natural gas plant. It all goes into the bank and it all comes out, and the rest of it's accounting. And to me, I don't think it's that different from the way the REC system accounting works. Now you can, for policy reasons, change the winners and losers, as Ken says. But you know, I don't think we're imagining somehow that RECs are handled in a wildly different system than the actual power, and it's all accounting. Thanks.
Okay. So Ken has a comment, and there's 2 comments online as well.
Just very quickly, directly to your question. When all the other states deregulated, Vermont was the only one that stayed vertically integrated. The reason Sheffield Wind got built is because Vermont could enter a long-term contract and nobody else could. So our policies have driven res and before res, the direct construction of renewable facilities. I will tell you, VEPSA only buys power that have Vermont Tier 1 recs attached to it. Before res, we would buy what they called system power. It could be natural gas, oil, we didn't care. Now that the res is in place, that contract has to say coming with Vermont Tier 1 recs. It has to be from a resource that is supplying what we want for generation types and locations. I have a position and a half who spend 80% of their time strictly working on solar, trying to help us meet Tier 2. And we've done 10 solar projects in the last 5 years in the small footprint that we have. I've had NextEra trying to sell me nuclear for 5 years. I mean, the VEPSA members, several of them had a contract for nuclear. That went away. And unless we change the res to a clean energy standard and say nuclear counts, we won't buy it. And I've been in limbo on that for 3 years now when we've debated what the res should look like. So the policy decisions and the conversations that are happening are very directly pushing the utilities to make certain decisions and avoid others, and are getting things built. The question is, who do we want to win? That's what it comes back to. When you put solar or you put a particular generation type, that drives us to do business with the people who own those companies. And it pushes us away from folks who don't own those companies.
We have 2 comments left, and then I think it will be time for a break. So this group has time to talk about clean energy standard versus renewable energy standard. Those 2 comments are online, Darren and then Ben.
Hi, good morning. I just wanted to jump in on the point about the REC accounting, separate from the question of kind of what's driving emissions reduction that I think, others have just addressed. But I struggle with the terminology of a shell game, because every single state that I'm aware that has enacted a renewable energy or renewable portfolio standard has used renewable energy certificates, as well as every private sector entity that has any voluntary corporate sustainability goal uses renewable energy certificates, because we cannot track an electron once it's on the grid. And so the way we account for this nationally, state level, corporate level, is by knowing that a megawatt hour of renewable electricity was generated, getting a certificate that in New England is within the NEPOOL GIS, which is a tracking system that ensures that that certificate, when used for a state policy, can only be used one time, that it's never double counted. And I think it's just fundamentally important to the work that we're doing here for us to have confidence in that system of accounting. Whatever policy construct we want to develop to build on the RES, to add to the RES, that underpinning is not only a Vermont-based system, not only a New England-based system, it's really national in scope. It's in the private and public sectors. And I think I would hate to see, public confidence in the tracking and accounting undermined because we use renewable energy certificates or credits, because every single state that has such a policy does that. And I think I'm not aware of another way that you could track that would provide the level of accuracy and transparency that the current accounting system does. So I just wanted to offer that perspective.
And the question behind that perspective is, what would it take to have confidence in the REC system?
Well,
is that an accurate reframe?
Just, in terms of, I'll just speak for Burlington Electric, we publish on our website every single year what our power resource mix is, what RECs we both sell and buy, because we both buy and sell in the Wind system, and then what our accounting looks like after those transactions. And we're 100% renewable before those transactions, and we're 100% renewable after those transactions. And the delta between those two is that we sell where we can to benefit our customers. And that's a policy decision, right? But the accounting transparency is there. And it's not just BED, that's at the state level. The Public Service Department tracks REC compliance for the RES. It's all publicly available. So yeah, it's not clear to me what else would be needed to really, have greater confidence in it, because I think it's well tracked and it's transparent.
Thanks, Darren. Ben?
Thanks. Wanted to respond, since it was my comment initially that it sounds like prompted Senator Bray's question. I also want to say I agree with Lewis and I agree with Ken on this one. And that doesn't happen every single time we have conversations. The res, and I'll be brief because I'm to a degree restating, absolutely agree that renewable energy standards work to drive what they're optimized for, right? Like, this is the policy that, as to what Darren just said, like, this is the policy that we've chosen as a nation. Renewable energy standards, renewable energy certificates to get renewables built. More than half of all the renewables in the United States have been driven by renewable energy standards. And while some of us probably would have chosen a different system, maybe a little bit more like a European model, that ship sailed several decades ago, and I don't think it's really worth digging into very much because we live in the United States and we're here now. What we're really saying, at VPIRG and some of the other groups here, is that right now it's optimized. It is not optimized enough for driving new renewable development. And that's, where really fundamentally some of the changes we're looking for, again, especially around new electric usage. And then I would also say, Ken, I completely agree that long-term contracts are critical to getting renewables built. It's why VPIRG supported the standard offer years ago, net metering, why in 2012 we supported a renewable energy standard that would have required, in addition to REC retirement, long-term contracts for power from renewable sources. I'm not necessarily saying that should be part of a renewable energy standard going forward, but if there's a real interest in, driving more attention on long-term contracts, it's a conversation I'd be happy to have, because they are very important. RECs are a very volatile market and long-term contracts are not. And so that's helpful as well if folks want to have that conversation.
Thank you, Bob. Drew, I think it's time for a break. It's going to take a bit of time for me to make sense of some of the scribbles here, and I need to check in with the co-chairs about where you might want to bring this conversation. The poll results, even though you didn't get a chance to discuss them as a full group, aren't wasted. That perspective is still there, and there is a way to work with it, even if not in full discussion. There may be a way to work with it, think about it, raise the questions that are there. I am thinking when you come back from the break, you're going to want to move to that conversation around clean energy standard versus renewable energy standard. Does that sound right?
I'm not looking, of course, for us to resolve this really healthy discussion we've had. So I suppose it's like time to give another healthy discussion.
Well, if there are discussions here that you want to continue, then that's legit. Just want to forecast it before we go to break.
Laura looks like she has something on her.
Yeah, I think we've hit a button here, a hot button. So, how do we kind of draw something out of this that is useful or that can help us move forward is something that we can talk about.
Rather than a new topic.
Or just what can we do with this, what we've got, how can we pull something out that helps us?
Okay, I think we should take a break.
Yeah. Can we circulate, we have the ability to take all the poll results and just circulate them through email, something like that?
Yes, they will be part of the summary and they're already posted. Anyone who's on live stream or in the Zoom meeting can see those results right now. And I can email them to all of you in the room if that's going to make it easier for you to see them. I think there are a couple of themes that came out of this conversation, and I almost hesitate to say them out loud, although I know there's a real utility there. My hesitation is because it's going to fall on your ears differently. But the utility is that there are a couple of things you are circling through. I can say them now. The co-chairs and I think we have some work to do before we come back to break to reframe it up for discussion. But there are a couple of themes, around that caution or hope that whatever policy comes forward, that it looks at that balance of new renewables versus existing renewables, definitions taken into account, like what is considered a new versus existing. And really being thoughtful about when fossil fuels contribute to the grid. I think there are some questions here around how to, what it would take to have confidence in the REC system, to know that it's working for you and reinforcing the things that you want it to reinforce rather than distracting. That's a conversation that's going to be hard for a group of people to have, and I'm hearing that who aren't actively using that all the time, that system. So to the extent that you have confidence in it, then in some ways I don't know if you're going to get to a full understanding in the next 45 minutes. I don't think you will. But I also recognize that when you don't have confidence in something, it's a distraction enough that it's hard to then focus on the other pieces. So I don't know how you're going to work with that. I don't think you're going to pick that up after the break, but there might be a way to figure out how to get your questions answered. How do you look into it enough to know what you're looking at?
So as I listened to you say that, the first thing I think you said was about what is the res surf? What is it designed to help us do? I think Ben said, it's not optimized to create new renewable energy. And so if that's your vision of what the regs does, it drives the development of new renewable energy. And I'm not sure that that will be good to come to a clear understanding of it. The regs follow on is kind of passively in a way like, well, how do you know that you're actually getting there? And regs as a practice.
There's several goals, right? All of you have different goals for what this policy can do. Some of them is bringing stability into the system so you know what you can promise and you can look ahead for what Vermonters are paying for their electricity and where it's coming from. So we can, it will get bigger before, the conversation will get bigger and more complicated before it comes together. However, I do think, let's take a break, put minds together around where you want this conversation to go afterwards. You have a fallback, which is around the clean energy standard versus renewable energy standard. That will go to some of those overarching goals that you might be talking about here. I also, by the end of the meeting, want to come back around to some of the information that is becoming available to you around technical analysis and at some point Brattle Group's economic analysis that may bring some information into this discussion to consider. You're not going to do that consideration today, but just want to remind you it's there and how to tap into it as a group. It's almost 10 o'clock. 10 minute, 15 minute? So we're going to come back to the live stream and back to this meeting at 10:15 even. Portia.